Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about a subject that I've touched on before, but this time what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you guys a specific example of a celebrity that I think it's important for all of us to know about it. So let's go ahead and start. So first off, before I get started, I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. This is my opinion, and this is based on my research, representing myself in the longest motion for new trial in the history of the state of Utah, wrongfully convicted for almost 12 years. So first off, I've mentioned this before. The first point is that there's two tiers, right, as far as the criminal justice system, right? There's those that are wealthy, like very wealthy and influential, and then there's everybody else. Very rarely will somebody that's very wealthy and influential be held accountable. It happens, but it's rare. The case that we're going to use as an example to illustrate this is the Johnny Depp case. Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, and there's tons of stuff all over social media about this case. It was a domestic violence case, but the point that I'm trying to make right here, this first one, is that Johnny Depp was charged with multiple felonies. Ultimately, he ended up pleading guilty to something, right? Like it was a deal that ultimately led to all charges being dropped, and ultimately he is not a felon. He probably spent a few hours maybe incarcerated, if that. The point that I'm trying to make is for most people to get charged with the stuff that he got charged with, because there's some pretty serious allegations. We're going to get to those allegations here in a moment, but there's some pretty serious allegations. For most of us, if we got hit with those, like that's a sure conviction. Whether you're going to trial and you get hit with the entire thing, or you decide to plead to something smaller, but like you're hit. But in this case, that didn't happen. Like I said, I've researched it, and ultimately he pled guilty, and it was like structured in such a way that if there are no issues within X amount of time, like the entire thing gets thrown away, right? Gets thrown out. And then he has a clean record. Now, don't get wrong. I'm not saying that Johnny Depp should have done time, right? Because as for those of you that followed the trial, right? And we're going to get to that here in a moment, it was all fabricated, right? If not all of it, a lot of it was fabricated. But I'm just saying, isn't it interesting, right? That had any of you or me been charged with those types of allegations, those types of charges, right? Because they were actually charges. It didn't stay at just the allegation portion. It would have been a sure conviction. But because of all his fame, money, and influence, bam, there you go. So that's number one. The second point that we're going to make, and I've talked about this before in some of my other content, where sometimes you'll have witnesses that lie, right, when they testify. And I think one of the flaws in our criminal justice system is that we grant witnesses complete immunity. And I know about this personally because in my case, right, I was able to prove that there was one person that lied. You know what I mean? I had evidence that he lied, and I tried to, to do something about this, right? In fact, there was two people that I was able to prove that lied, but one of them was just blatantly obvious, right? It was an expert. It was a former police officer that decided to become a crime scene reconstruction expert. Anyways, my point here is I tried to sue him, and I learned the hard way that you can't sue a witness for his statements in court. I'm not an attorney, so you have to check with your attorney if that happened to you, and maybe they've changed the laws, but I doubt it. That's been the law for a very long time, as I understand it. And this was a ruling by the court that said, nope, you can't sue him. There was evidence that came out, irrefutable evidence, that she had lied. There was no ifs and buts about it. She had lied about a number of things, but there was no consequence. Like she did not, there were no criminal charges for perjury. There wasn't any civil litigation for the actual lie. She actually lost damages awarded, but it was for the defamation, but not for the lies when she testified at trial. She lied and she got busted. And that's what I'm talking about. That's one of those things that I think it needs to change. I understand why that law exists, right, that rule. And it's some concerns about, witnesses might be afraid to testify if you start holding them accountable through criminal charges or civil litigation. But I say you have to. If people are lying, you can prove they're lying. Why are you protecting them? Why are you protecting people that somebody can prove, right? A defendant or somebody else can prove is lying. And by prove, I mean evidence that's solid, whether you have a document or a recording or whatever it is. If you can prove that person's lying, hold them accountable 100%. A lot of these cases, people's lives are on the line. For Johnny Depp, her lies led to him losing tens of millions of dollars, maybe even more, right? Because it completely derailed his career. No accountability. Even though for the defamation, and that's different, understand, right? That's different. The defamation, he was held liable, or she was held liable. Ultimately, she had to pay some money for making false allegations and then lying in court. There was no accountability. I think that's a problem within our criminal justice system. You would get a much better system if you started holding those people accountable. They would think about it twice before they go and they take the stand and decide to just lie under oath. This includes also prison rats. You got a lot of prison rats that lie because prosecution offers them this huge incentive to lie. Of course, that's not what's told to them. It's a huge incentive to come and be a cooperating witness. But if you watch my content, you've heard me explain how a lot of times they lie. They don't want to go spend 5-10 years locked up in prison, especially when reality hits them that's what they're looking at. And if the prosecution goes, hey, I'm just going to give you 3 months or 6 months and then you're out. A lot of people fabricate stories. That's the second point. One additional point on that second one is that by her lying victim, it actually hurts all the other women that have actually been hurt, because there are legitimate cases out there. And those people that are the culprits, that the aggressors in those situations, should be held accountable if these are legitimate allegations, legitimate actions, actual things that they did do. So don't get me wrong there, but I think that individuals like Amber Heard and what she did with her lying and all that, what it does is it hurts those people that are actual victims. So that's also one last point on that one that I wanted to make. And the third and final point that I want to make, right, regarding this case with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, is that evidence came out that she had actually been violent with him. She had thrown wine bottles at him. She had hit him. In fact, there's a recording of her admitting that she had hit him. And she had done this many times. And she admits that she would lose control and would be violent. But there were no criminal charges put on her. Why? That doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Like, what are we saying? Are we saying that there's a certain group of people in our society that are above the law? Do you know what I'm saying? If there are no consequences, if the prosecution is going to pick up that case, then essentially you're saying you can do that as much as you want. That's not a problem. By the way, I've met many guys that have been in relationships where they were the ones constantly getting beat up, and then police were called and they were the ones that got in trouble, and they ended up getting charges, and they ended up getting, going to prison and doing some time. So this is not like, we're using this example, right, with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Understand that this happened, and it happens quite a bit. Like I said, I was incarcerated for almost 12 years. I've researched tons of case law. I've watched some of the court TVs and the trials, and I've talked to many people since, and I get people email me all the time with examples that are similar to this. People that have had their lives completely turned upside down because prosecution decides that they're not going to prosecute the crazy ex-girlfriend or their wife for domestic violence charge. And I think that's got to change, because it's not just about holding them accountable. That for sure, right? That's important. But it's also because if you don't do that, then what it encourages is the opposite. It encourages women that are unstable, and it could be men, unstable, to just throw allegations at the other person, and then their life gets turned upside down, completely destroyed. I mean, you can imagine, obviously, Johnny Depp is incredibly wealthy, and he didn't spend any real time in jail or prison, right? But for the average person, made those same allegations, you'd be locked up. And even if you were just locked up for a month, you'd probably get fired, you'd lose your car, you'd lose your house, your reputation in your neighborhood and your community completely destroyed, and so on and so forth. There's all these consequences. And then even afterwards, right after, let's say you bail out, which is hard to do because for those types of charges, the bail's usually pretty high. Let's say you do bail out, but then after that, you get out. Let's say you prove you're innocent, but then what happens? You prove your innocence, but the damage is already done. You would think there'd be consequences, right? What if it was like the opposite? We were just talking about that. That person was actually the aggressor and the one that kept beating you up and throwing things at you, and just tons of violence in the opposite direction, but they just fabricated those other charges against you, right? Just because they knew the system and they played the system. There are no consequences for that person. They get to continue living their life. They made the allegation and life is good. On to the next victim. Where this person got their life turned upside down, will they ever get back on their feet, right? Will they ever be able to get their life back together? Their credit is destroyed. They have no money. Now they have this lawyer looks them up. All this stuff comes up on Google, even if it was dismissed, because these media outlets will publicize any charges, the allegations, but they don't put the same amount of time and energy behind to let the public know that this person was acquitted. They don't do that. They will rarely ever do that, because I have seen exceptions of that, but that's like the exception. So my third point is that if at some point, right, evidence comes out that it's actually, right, in this example, that it was Amber Heard who was the actual aggressor, she was the violent one, she was the one that hit him all the time, then why aren't we holding her accountable? Why doesn't she have a couple of felonies thrown at her? And that's got to change. And for all you ladies out there, like, think of your husband, like, somebody at work or some friend, whatever, neighbor decides to make some crazy allegations like that towards him. Then it becomes significant. Or if your son, that's actually more likely. If you have a son someday and then he ends up in a situation like that, how would you feel if now you're seeing your son's life turned completely upside down? All that he worked for, right? How hard he worked to put his life together. And all of a sudden, his life gets turned upside down and destroyed in real time because he's not Johnny Depp. So anyways, to go back to my kind of recurring theme, right, in a lot of my content, I'm advocating for a system that's fair for all of us. And right now, that's not the way it works. We're looking at this, there's exceptions. There's loopholes. Certain people are not being held accountable. And I think that needs to change. That's incredibly important and relevant. We saw it, right? On live TV, we saw it with Amber Heard, Johnny Depp. He was, despite the fact that in the end, it ended up being that she was the crazy one, made up a bunch of stuff, went out of her way to like orchestrate all these lies. Despite all that, he was the one in the end that ended up losing way more, like significantly more. is that settlement that she has to pay at some point that it pales in comparison to what the amount of money that he lost by not getting jobs, getting let go for movies, right? And all sorts of consequences. He could have made another 10 movies before he was going to retire, but that's probably unlikely to happen now. So anyways, hope that was interesting. Hope that was helpful. Enough is enough. Let's start making some changes. Support some positive changes in the right direction so that we do have a system that's fair for all of us. Thank you for your support. Look forward to seeing you in my next video.